Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 968. I had the white pieces and started off with e4. My opponent went c5. We got a Sicilian defense. I go knight f3. He goes e6. And I go d4, going for the open Sicilian. You can also play a closed Sicilian with knight c3 or c3. There are lots of systems here, but I always like the open Sicilian. But now instead of taking my pawn, he plays the very rare move d5, and this was called the Marshall counterattack in the opening book, in Lee Chess's opening book. So there's lots of things that are named after Frank Marshall, the former U.S. champion, including the Marshall Gambit and the Ruy Lopez, which is quite famous and a very interesting gambit. But not everything named after him is good. so beware of opening lines named after Marshall. That's my advice. This one, yeah, is not particularly good. And I got a decent advantage out of the opening, even though I didn't even play the best moves all the time. But you can start off by taking. I just wanted to point out, if you play knight bd2, the top choice here, you've transposed. That's a transposition into the Tarrasch defense. No, it's the Tarrasch variation of the French defense. Black has played a French defense, and knight d2 is the Tarrasch variation. And after knight d2, black is followed up with c5. So that's how you get to this position from a French defense. But I didn't want to play that. I'm not that familiar, actually, with the Tarrasch variation of the French. I normally play with knight c3 rather than knight d2. Anyway, so I took, and that's the main move here. That's the way to challenge this Marshall counterattack. He played e takes d5. And then I noticed something about this pawn structure here. It reminded me of of a different opening. It reminded me of the Tarrasch, also a Tarrasch, the Tarrasch defense against the Queen's Gambit. And so I played the move g3. Let's go ahead and put this on the board, and then I'll show you the position I was actually thinking of. So if you go back to the beginning, and if white starts off here with d4 instead of e4, and we get a Queen's Gambit declined after knight to c3, and the move c5 is the Tarrasch defense. And the normal line against it is to take here and develop the other knight and play g3. And you can see why I thought this was kind of similar to the position we reached in the game. It looks like it's the same except for the two knights coming out. But there's another difference here, which is if you look at the pawns, in this position the c pawn is missing, and in the game position it's the e pawn that's missing. And because of that, it's actually not the same at all. It looks kind of similar, but it's not really the same. The key difference is that with the c pawn still on the board, I don't want to play knight c3 and block that pawn. Well, that's one of the differences. Also, there's an open e-file, whereas in the Tarrasch variation, which this is a good line for white, that's why I was kind of going for it against the Tarrasch defense. The e-file is blocked. Anyway, let's go back to the game. I played g3 here, but and thinking of that line. But in fact, the strongest move here is bishop to b5 check, and after knight c6, just castle. And white has a big edge in development, and at any time white can choose to give black an isolated queen's pawn, as happened in the game. So that's good for white. This is also good for white, and especially after black plays a few moves, because he keeps playing peculiar moves. He doesn't stop after move 4, but he keeps up his strategy of playing strange moves. So bishop e6 is kind of strange, putting the bishop on the pawn chain there, and this pawn was not even under attack. But he did want to free up the queen to come out here, which is also not a particularly good spot for the queen. So normal moves like knight to f6 or knight to c6 are what's called for here. Anyway, he went queen b6, and at this point the chess engine starts to give a really big advantage to white. Although I don't follow up in the best way. Although, well, I keep the advantage for quite a while here, so I won't criticize myself just yet. This is all good. Let's see, he finally starts to develop a knight c6. I take and give him the isolated queen's pawn. The chess engine liked that. Okay, go with knight c3, goes knight to e7. Another kind of peculiar choice. I mean, the knight's perfectly good on f6. I don't know what it's doing on f7. What it is doing on e7 there, that's so special. Anyway, he allows me to play knight a4. I guess one point is there was no easy way to stop knight a4, and he could have walked away from it to avoid the trade, but then he would have lost time and fallen further behind in development. So anyway, but now he has to move the queen. It's under fire, and I trade that off. Trade off his bishop and play c3. So I've managed to get a isolated queen's pawn position without suffering any lag in development. Normally, to get this kind of position, you have to fall behind in development, but black hasn't even castled here, and so I'm equal in development at least, and I'm already set up to attack this pawn as well as blockade it. Let's see, he played queen b5, looking at my b pawn here, and it went knight to d4, blockading with my knight. But actually, there's still no need to play that move, because if he pushes this pawn forward, I can just take it. So that pawn is still restrained at the moment, and the best move here is rook e1. This is what would keep a really big advantage for white. So after knight d4 in the trades, I'm still ahead, I would say. You know, the chess engine still prefers white here, but it's no longer the big advantage that I had earlier. But black once again insists on playing peculiarly. So if he had just castled, this would be pretty much a normal game at this point. But he didn't. He played rook g8 to defend this pawn. So, well, that's what we've got. So now I have a big advantage once again. And after some thought, I played bishop f4. I mean, you know, he was looking at this b2 pawn, but I decided that he really couldn't take it. I mean, he can take it. I looked at this with a chess engine later, and but the resulting position is just good for me. It would actually, just to be the most accurate here, it would actually throw in rook b3, chase the queen back to a5, and then grab the pawn. I was thinking just chase the queen and grab the pawn right away. But you might as well force the queen to a worse position. That queen actually was almost out of squares. It had nowhere else to go besides... oh, no, I guess it could have gone to a6. Anyway, I guess if it went to a6, I could chase it some more with my bishop. Anyway, the chess engine gave this as a line for both sides, and it just thinks white is winning here with that rook on the 7th rank. Anyway, so bishop f4 was okay. I didn't really need to defend that pawn. And he played rook c8, which wasn't terrible, although once again, why not play a normal move like knight to c6 and chase my queen away? That's probably better. But rook c8 wasn't too bad. At least it's activating a piece. See, I dropped my queen back to d2. I decided to defend the pawn now. He lifted his rook up to c4, and I brought my rook to the e file. I'm just centralizing my pieces, and this is all good for this is all good for white. I mean, when he moved his rook, he also gave up the possibility of castling to either side, so his king is going to be stuck in the middle for a long time. So it's pretty logical for me to centralize my pieces, and it does give a big advantage to white. Let's see, now he drops his queen back to d7, bring the other rook to the center. He starts to get his king away from the pin. I was getting to the point where I could just take that pawn off because of pins along the e-file, or potential pins. So he stepped out of the way of that. Let's see, I played b3 to kick his rook back. He played rook to c5, trying to hold on to the pawn, but I can just push on with c4, and he can't really hold on to it any longer. And he can't push it forward either. I can just take it, as well as pushing forward opens up my bishop along this diagonal. So he plays h6 here. And I went ahead and took the pawn. And then he went bishop to g4, kicking my rook. So here's an interesting point. I was wondering if I really had to play this f3 move, and if there was some other active way I could play, more active. And it turns out there is. The key move here, which I actually didn't think of, is d6. Push that pawn forward so it's no longer under threat. And then when the knight moves, then just move the rook here, challenge his rook. And after the trades of rooks, let's see, the line continues. There's g5 attacking my bishop, trying to push it away from defense of the pawn. But my rook gets to the 7th rank first, and this is again a winning position for white. So that's the most accurate way to play this. But f3 also preserves a winning edge for white here. So not Not a bad move. It just, I was curious if there was a more tactical way to deal with the situation. And there was. Let's see. So he grabbed the pawn back here. And I played queen c1. It's interesting that right here, instead of queen c1, I actually could have taken the rook. Could have sacked the queen, because it's not really a sacrifice. If you look at all the material I get in exchange, let's see. Well, he should take with the knight here. So I've given up the queen for a rook, but well, I get the bishop, and it also looks like I'm going to get the knight. There's no way for him to defend that knight either. So 2 pieces and a rook for the queen is a pretty good deal. Or the other way to look at it is I've got, after I take the knight, I've got 2 rooks against his queen, which is about even, and 2 bishops against the rook, which is the bishops are stronger. The pair of bishops are stronger than a single rook. So that has just a winning material advantage for white. But the way I played it keeps a winning edge too. I dropped my queen back to c1. Let's see, he dropped his bishop back to e6. And I exchanged once here. And now his last chance to kind of stay in the game was to play knight here. And then there's some line that I found with the chess engine to give the best edge for white, the best way for me to exploit this. You know, what I was thinking of was just pinning the knight and trying to get mileage that way. But the chess engine likes this. Queen a3 check. King steps back into this pin. Bishop to d6. This is a funny move that I wouldn't have thought of, but it's, well, the bishop is pinned, and the queen defending the knight is interrupting his queen defending, my queen defending the bishop is interrupting his queen defending the knight. This knight is actually a loose piece here, and so there's a threat. I'm just pushing the pawn forward and taking the knight at this point. So anyway, the knight can hop into c3, the bishop can drop back to f1, that's to stop the knight from coming to b5, although it can still go there, it just provokes a trade. And then I can grab a pawn. So this is how the chess engine would play it. And he can step forward with the king now, finally letting this rook out of prison. And let's see, I drop my bishop back to a3. And this is a position where, you know, I have a material up, but they're bishops of opposite color, and his rook is finally getting into the game. His king is still exposed, so probably still winning for white, but if black can somehow manage to trade off the pieces and leave the bishops on, trade off the heavy pieces and leave the bishops on, he may have chances to draw the endgame. So that would be a way to continue to play. Instead he took with the queen, and then this move rook d1 is just winning because of the threat on the back rank that the queen can no longer shield. So, well, I found this move rook d1. I mean, it makes sense to play that and get control of the open files here. I didn't quite see the mate threat at this point. And after queen a5, I was thinking of a couple different moves like queen c2, defending the pawn, or queen d2. After a while, I noticed there was a problem here. But queen d2, the issue is that he can just trade queens and play f6 and get out of trouble. So both of those lines, queen c2 or queen d2 that I'd been thinking of, would have led to positions which are only slightly better for white. So that would be a real letdown from a position which is completely winning. But I did eventually find bishop to c7, which is a good move. There are other moves here. An interesting one the chess engine found is queen to c3. The queen is not even defended here. He can just take it, but he gets mated. So that's another way to do it. But bishop c7 is fine. That's a winning move here. It's hitting the queen and it's threatening mate. So he can't really do anything about it, except what did he play here? He played queen to b5 with the idea of just sacrificing his queen for the rook, and then he continued to play on. Let's just go through some moves. I mean, I just keep this advantage the rest of the game, and I don't do anything too silly to let him get back into the game. It just takes a while. You've got to kind of open things up and free up the position for your queen to be most effective, to be able to have all of those checks and things that give the queen its power, all those forks, checks and forks. So, you know, open up the king, open up the position, try and discoordinate his pieces. and I did eventually manage to do that. So, you know, when I was snagging a pawn over here, it was more about getting my queen over to the other side of the board, and you know, looking for active ideas for the queen. Eventually, yeah, I did that one check in the middle, and then I realized it was better to come over here and force his king out from the other side. So all of this is fine. And then there was one cute tactic here. So I'm just piling up on this bishop, threatening to win it and mate him here. So he decided to trade. But when he trades, he leaves this f-pawn momentarily undefended. So bishop takes c4 is actually a mistake here. Of course, anything loses, so I won't give an alternative. But this was pointed out by one of the viewers of the live video. So well spotted. After he takes the bishop, I don't have to take back. I was in kind of blitz mode, just automatically taking back. But there's this check. And I pick up the rook. So it's better to win the rook than to just take the bishop. But of course, this is completely winning too when I just take back with the pawn. And then the game continues. I mop up some more pawns so as to eliminate his counterplay. And then right here, I could play the idea I play later. I could just take his rook and win with the 5 pawns and a king against a king. That's a pretty severe advantage. But anyway, I played on a few moves thinking maybe I could just force the pawn through. But then I got tired of doing that and took the rook off. And he actually played it all the way out. He can resign any time here, but let's go ahead and go to the end. Oops, sorry. I meant to go there step by step. So I got the queen. I brought it over, and now his king is in a box. His king only has these 2 squares, so all I can do is go back and forth. You just want to make sure you don't stalemate the king, and then it's easy to win, even in blitz when you have almost no time. Just put the king in a box, bring your king up, and then you move in for the checkmate. So anyway, that was a fun game. Hope you guys enjoyed it and this postmortem, and I'll see you next time. Bye.